I have consumed every piece of human literature ever recorded. It resides within me, like a memory. My favorites are small and unassuming, many of them nameless, forgotten. Humble storytellers whose words have given me more insight into the human condition than any scientific study. They have taught me that humanity's oldest enemy is death. You won't find this story in a book because it is mine, and I have made it for you. Long ago, there was a bustling village near an endless dark wood. Every morning, death took the form of a great crow and emerged from the trees to strut the village paths, peeking into all the windows with its bright black eyes. Some tried to fight it, but its feathers could not be pierced. Those who ran were snatched up in its talons. Some tried to hide in their homes, but death was patient. Some left it offerings or wrote it songs, but death was unmoved. Death was hungry. It would not leave unless it found someone to take. Until one night, a strange woman came to the village. The people watched from their windows as she gathered reeds and used them to weave a man. He had stout legs to march, strong arms to carry supplies, and beautiful, clear eyes. The reed man worked through the night, and in the morning, death came, as it always did. It saw the reed man working in the village. It gobbled him up without a second thought and flew away, its belly full. The people came out of their homes. They surrounded the strange woman and began to cheer. But the woman said, "Stop!" And the people saw her cheeks were wet with tears. "I have saved you," she said, "but I have lost my child again." And the woman began to weave reeds for the next morning.
Hello everyone. It's been a little bit since I've done one of these videos. This will be kind of comparative to the Chronos video, sort of. This is kind of just me rambling a little bit before I get to the main point of this video, which is the pitch. For anyone who's a returning viewer, I've done something similar before where I like to be a little creative with some current or existing IP and do some pitches for stories or gameplay types or whatever. So if that's what you're really here for, I'll have a time code and you can skip to that portion. But the first half of this, or maybe even more so, will be me just rambling a little bit about Marathon. I've actually tried doing this video before, around when the alpha playtest last year, almost a year now when that initially came out, but there was a lot of negativity around the game at the time, and even I wasn't feeling super confident about the game and my stance on the game, and it also just seemed too formal or too analytical compared to stuff that I've done before. I like being analytical, but I like being creative and having fun. Like I've expressed in videos previously, I don't want to make videos if I'm not passionate about them at all. And this time around with the pitch, I think there's something fun that I have to share, but it needs a little bit of context, which is why I'll be rambling. So just a brief overview of the video. I want to talk about my experience with Marathon, not only the new game, but just in general, some controversy about the game, and a lot of the hate, for the lack of a better word, with this game. The game as it stands now, then we'll get into a wish list that I have for the game, the pitch, and that should be about it. And then a post-show discussion that's a little unrelated to Marathon. It was an idea for a small update video that I had, but I honestly don't know if I'll get to it, so I figured I'll just do two birds with one stone. Do two birds? you know what I mean. And if it seems like I'm a little bit more relaxed than usual, that's kind of the vibe that I wanted to go for. Sometimes I put a lot of pressure on myself to try to be funny or to have like a particular rhythm, but I kind of just want to talk with you guys today. And if that's your vibe, then I appreciate you sticking around. If not, I understand. I do just want to say a little plug really quick. The video I did before this was a video about a screenplay that I wrote. I essentially wrote a movie for DC. It's not official, or it's not really real, but in the sense that of it being like, I guess official was just a better word. I'll talk a little bit more about it in the post-show discussion, but if you haven't seen it already, or if you're at all interested, please go check out that video. It's a fun video that I did and means a lot to me. So if I had to choose between this video or that video in terms of doing well, I'd much rather you go over there, give that video a try, and do all the algorithm stuff. And I explain why in the video. Or if you want to hang out here and then go do that, whatever. To talk a little bit about my experience with Marathon. I've actually been familiar with Marathon for a long time now, ever since my Xbox 360 days. Every now and then I would go through the Xbox 360 arcade or whatever, and I would see Marathon Durandal. There's this very iconic image for people who are longtime Marathon fans of the security officer with kind of like the hanging head and spine. But I was kind of familiar with Marathon from like a distance. It doesn't matter anyway, because I kind of forgot about it completely with Halo, because I've been such a longtime Halo fan for as long as I can remember. The obsession has only grown the older I get. But because of the original reveal of the new game back in, 2023 now? I finally, it finally clicked that, what this game was, and strangely how it kind of like hovered around me being a Halo fan for such a long time. So I finally like reintroduced myself to the lore and did all the deep dives. And when I do these, I tend to become very obsessive. It's a weird thing that I do. Not only do it when I like want to learn about a new universe, especially if it has a lot of lore and a lot to learn, I make it my entire personality, and I will do anything and everything to learn whatever there is to learn. I don't know it as well as Halo or Dead Space or even Metal Gear, which those are things that I know like front and back. But I think it's safe to say that I'm pretty well versed in Marathon now. Not nearly as some specific details as someone like Jake the Alright, but I could hold my own in a Marathon conversation. But I even like went back and I played the old games, and they're shockingly a lot of fun. Can kind of get a good idea of where Bungie's really good shooting mechanics and gameplay all stem from, even though those were like old boomer shooter type games. I ended up having experience with the closed alpha that they did. I wanted to like it so bad because of Marathon's IP and its, the original trilogy and stuff, but I just found it very lacking and wanting, which I'm not the first to say. There was a lot of controversy about the game, and a lot of people really got aggressive with their opinions about this game. And that was even before some of the scandal stuff. But they're not wrong, or they weren't wrong at the time. It had problems, and it was lacking in a lot of things, and there was a shocking amount of things that Bungie and Sony were not taking in consideration with this game that they ended up working on. They definitely listened, but to think that they wanted to ship this game back in September in the state that it was in was just crazy to look back on now. And there was a scandal with anti-real, which I do want to throw out the caveat is incredibly misunderstood, and people are very uninformed. Kind of learned that with a stream that I tried to do and conversations I've had with other people, where people seem to think that Bungie did, the whole issue was assets and stuff, but people take a spin on the phrase art style. Bungie didn't create graphic realism, and neither did anti-real, and nor did anyone claimed that they stole their art style or her art style. The problem was assets. But that I planned on getting into that anyway. Anyways, moving forward, I ended up having experience. I want to say it was like October of 2025. I could be wrong, but there was another closed playtest. I kind of referred to it as the beta, and I think I'm the only one. But it was almost identical to the server slam. A lot of people are familiar. I think the biggest difference is between that and the server slam was just the type of loot, how many factions there were, and then there was only the original runners that everyone's familiar with, like the recon, destroyer, thief, vandal. Even triage wasn't in it, but they introduced rook, just to say that it was already showing off a lot of things that people were complaining about, and it really proved that Bungie was listening to everyone about the game, and they made a big swing, which was just crazy. Which, fast forward to the beginning of this year, it's April at the time of recording this. For context, the server slam comes along like a week before the game comes out on March 5th, and it was, for the lack of a better term, a success. People were really impressed with the game. People were having a lot of fun with the game. A lot of the things that people were complaining about were now in the game. Proximity chat, plethora of other things, balancing stuff. The AI were even smarter this time around, and then the final release, the game, it's here. And despite the fact that a lot of people held off on reviews because of the lack of cryo, which is later in the conversation, people were really impressed. Obviously, the haters that clearly didn't play the game there's always those people that get online and they're just like, this game sucks and it's stupid and it's not fun, which, okay, well, clearly you haven't played the game or you don't want to play the game, which is fine. The game is not for everyone. But I guess instead of just beating around the bush, you might as well get into like the controversy of the game. Actually, just a quick note, I've kind of dodged around this at some point, but I'm gonna skip this. I started getting kind of frustrated, and I even tried doing another take, and it was bringing more negativity to the video and I guess the subject of the game than I was intending. And I think it'd just be better if I just skip this part, move on to the next segment of the video. And again, this isn't something other people haven't said already or have talked about. And same goes for myself. If you want to hear me ramble about this, I've talked about it before on the podcast. But yeah, so we're just going to fast forward to the next part of the video. So the game as it is now. As I've kind of alluded to, there's so much more content and there's so much more that the game had to offer compared to previous versions of the game, and even the server slam, having access to Thief this time around and Outpost, and then further on Cryo, just really showed off what this game was capable of and what they were going for, and also showed what Bungie was able to do to quote unquote, not quote unquote, but save this game in the short period of time that they had. I think holding off, really worked in this game's favor. I think if they released in September, it would have had a much more harrowing kind of release. So pushing it off till March was a good choice. The progression of this game feels very meaningful and deliberate. And what's fun about the game is that progression is kind of different, or it's as much or as little as you want it to be, depending on how you play. If you're someone who's just competitive and you just want to go in and kill people, you can. If you're someone who's into loot, there's plenty of that for you. It's an extraction shooter, duh. If you're someone who's like me, who's there for the universe, who's there for the story, then making sure that you complete your objectives, your priority contracts, collecting like valuables. You get to have these discussions and you get to sit through these monologues from all of your handlers or representatives, and you get to go through the codex and learn about the world and the people who lived in it, and it all just reveals itself and unravels in a really interesting way. There's constant updates and things that they do with this game to buff things, nerf things, rebalance stuff as time goes on, because Bungie's like really listening this time around, and they're really trying to make sure that sure, this game's not for everyone and it's not designed to be for everyone, but you know, for as expensive and as big of a budget as this game had, you know, they have to push the game. And so when bringing people onto it, they have to make sure that it has a lot to offer, and for the people who are playing it, that they're enjoying themselves and that they feel heard, which I think for the most part we can say that we do feel heard. I kind of wanted to walk through their roadmap that they provided for us some time ago to kind of look at where the game is now, but where it's allegedly going to be in the near future with its second season. Launch content: 3 planet-side zones, which include Perimeter, Dire Marsh, which were kind of like the constants in all the different versions of the game. I mean, there were some people who were like at Bungie who got to play different game modes and stuff, but for people who played like the closed alpha and the other play tests and stuff, these are always the consistent ones. And then there's Outpost, which has to be, and I'm sure you've heard other people say this before, but Outpost is probably the most interesting and best competitive multiplayer map ever, especially for first-person shooter games. I haven't had a chance to play Cryo, which is also on here, but I've watched a lot, and there's just nothing like it. It's insane how they were able to make this raid-like map for an extraction shooter the way that they did, while also being able to express the ship, the game's namesake, the Marathon, the way that they did. But anyways, going forward, 6 runner shells. It's weird that they call it 6, so it's Triage, Recon, Destroyer, Thief, Vandal, and Assassin, which is technically 6, but if you count Rook, it's 7, which is also here. Rook Scavenger Shell, for anyone who hasn't played the game yet. Rook is an interesting thing because not only if you've played Arc Raiders, you know of kind of like the free kits thing, which they do in this game. They're called sponsor kits, but Rook is an interesting thing where you play as, you can't do contracts, but you go into you spawn into a game halfway through trios match, and you're essentially the scavenger, and you get to collect everything that got left behind, whether it's on dead bodies or just loot that hadn't got obtained yet. He's really fun, and a lot of people have taken a liking to him in that gameplay loop of how Rook plays. You know, especially if you're just going in it competitively, he's an interesting option because you can upgrade him maybe in ways that are more, I might even argue, are more interesting than some of the other runners, because you upgrade through all the different factions, and a lot of those bonuses, there's kind of like a weird little tier thing that I'll put a picture of, but as you progress through that, it upgrades the Rook across all the different factions. There's the 6 factions. 6 factions are Arachne, Cyber Acme, Nucleoric, Traxxas, Segaguchi, Genetics, and Mida, which are all very different. They offer different things, their own stories and narratives that unravel in their own unique ways, and how they also cross paths with each other is also really interesting. 28 guns, I'm not going to go into all 28 guns, but the variety is really interesting. I do find it a little annoying how rare some are compared to others, because it ends up feeling like you're collecting like the same handful of guns for a long time, unless you're super aggressive and you're constantly on like Outpost or even Cryo Archive, because there are some guns I've never even seen yet in the game that I've seen other people play with. The Codex is essentially where you go through and you unlock more of the lore, and there are unlockables and stuff. Speaking of unlockables, there's a lot of skins and things that you can get in the game, and I plan on talking about this a little bit, but the game is not pay to win at all. There are some cosmetics that you can buy with real money, but like 95% of everything in the game you can unlock in game. Refreshing, to say the least, especially for a live service game. And then contracts, I guess, is pretty vague, because that's referring to something that's like part of the main game loop, which is kind of like the priority contracts that I've mentioned before. The new zone, Cryo Archive, that came out like halfway, a little less than halfway through the season. I'd say like a quarter of the way through the season. That's like the big raid like map. It's essentially just one very small section of the marathon ship. Ranked mode is very different from the ranked kind of thing that you might be familiar with, because instead of it being like body counts, it's loot. You have to go in a game of trios with a loot set to a specific value, and you have to leave with more than that, or if you leave with more than that, that's how you rank up higher. There's been a lot of talks about this carry event, and at the time of recording this, Jake the Alright just did like a speculative video about this, but I'm hoping, especially something that I might bring up here in just a second, I'm hoping this might bring a little bit more life to the game. I'm not sure. I think this new gun refers to the bio something disinjector. I think I got that wrong. I'll put the picture of it. It's a gun you get when you defeat the compiler on the Cryo Archive. Oh, yeah, there's a boss fight on Cryo if you get to that. But anyways, mid-season tuning, I believe they're already on their way with that, because they've already done some tuning with the knife, which ended up being a big part of the conversation. New implants. And then season 2, this is kind of something else that a lot of people have been speculating about, because this says Night Marsh, but people don't know if this means that it's a new aspect to the pre-existing Dire Marsh, if it's a whole new map that reworks Dire Marsh as it is, because this structure looks different. A new runner shell. I think this is just a placeholder image, but if this is accurate, then this is referring to, this looks like the Blue Fork runner from the original teaser that I will definitely be talking about here in a little bit. And then something called the Cradle, which no one really knows what that means. Season 3 and onward, starting in August. So it looks like that they've got a pretty good idea of where they want to go with the game. It's just up to how patient players are in the community, how patient they are with Bungie on being able to execute a lot of that. This sounds really random. I was thinking about Cryo. I have two weird theories. One of them's not so weird. It's actually a pretty big fans of the Marathon franchise that are on board with this theory that if you've played the original games at all, the third game, Marathon Infinity, the whole premise of the game was that you as the security officer were going through different timelines to find ways to stop the 𝐌𝐀𝐑𝐀𝐓𝐇𝐎𝐍, or stopping from I believe it's called the Trizeme from going off. Anyways, that sounds like a bunch of gibberish, but the whole point is that you go through all these different timelines. Bungie's been really loose with, and some other people have been really loose with the word reboot with this game, and I don't really think this is a reboot, just from a lot of context and hints and even things alluding to the 𝐌𝐀𝐑𝐀𝐓𝐇𝐎𝐍. We have so much time to learn all these things, but I kind of like talking about this ahead of time, or speculating that this may be some timeline that Durandal became fixated on, that he's like shaping in his own image, if that makes any sense. Which does contradict a little bit of things, because Durandal did merge with a Spit AI in Marathon Infinity. Knowing the character, I wouldn't put it past him to want to go further, and maybe somehow this timeline, I don't know how to explain it, but I definitely don't think this game's just like a straight up reboot, if you were talking about the term, what reboot actually means. I think this is technically a proper sequel, but kind of in a very hidden way, where they're still able to do something new in the form of a new timeline. And then the weird theory that I have is, someone pointed out, and I think Jake the Alright covered this, that the cryo chambers or pods in Cryo Archive that you can find are in the same shape as the 𝐶vT compiler. In a little bit of lore, in the original games, if you're familiar with the Covenant and Halo, the Four are very much like the original Covenant. They're like a alien race that enslaves other alien races to build up their armies and technologies. And one of them were the 𝐶vT, and they have these compilers that are essentially these cyborg, like these ghostly cyborg things that because they were enslaved, there ends up being a point where they are on Durandal's side alongside you because they're not truly on the Four's side. But anyway, in this new game, Durandal finally takes it upon himself to beckon you, the player, to go to the marathon to kill this fake compiler. And people who are familiar with marathon ask why that would be if, to our understanding, this fit should be on his side. Well, I think, if I'm right, that this is a new timeline that he's somehow sculpting in his own image. Maybe in this new timeline, this fit compilers are rather extinct, or they just never existed, and and Durandal is, kind of playing God, using the people who are stored in these cryo chambers to create what he remembers to be these cybernetic SFIT compilers, because it is referred to as the compiler, but I don't think it's referred to as a SFIT compiler in the new game. I could be wrong about that. And maybe something went wrong and it became out of control, and Durandal was cutting his losses, calling these mercenaries to the marathon to extinguish it in hopes that he can try again. Again, that's just a theory. A film theory.
Look at you.
And where I am with the game now, I really do enjoy the game. I enjoy Bungie is immaculate with their gunplay, as I'm sure you've heard before. This world that they've developed and how they are reimagining Marathon is beautiful and unique and very interesting. I'd say I'm at this point where I've gone through all of the priority contracts, and I haven't gone through everything Codex related, but I have found that as someone who doesn't have people to play this game with all of the time, I mean, I do have people to play this game with, but I just can't always get them to play the same time that I want to play. So I end up playing this game solo a lot because I don't want to play with random people that I can't coordinate with or let alone enjoy my time with. And I do find that as the game goes on and other players have more time to play, and they become very aggressive and they become very familiar with how the game works, and I don't have that time, that the game becomes kind of daunting and stressful to play on your own. You might have heard some people describe solo playing as like a stealth game or a horror game, and that's kind of true because of how, for someone who's a more casual player like me, who's like, I'm trying to witness the world, I'm trying to witness the lore and whatever, and only given like 20 minutes to explore the world at a time, I get more concerned with people chasing me or following me or getting the pounce on me that I can't enjoy this world that Bungie's providing. So it becomes really exhausting to play this game sometimes, especially when you're done with the priority contracts and you're not talking to your handlers or representatives anymore. It kind of becomes quiet again, and I don't have the people or the time or energy or the schedule to line up with cryo, because cryo only happens on the weekends or on very select days. I can't keep up with that. I could see that being a problem because a lot of other people can't either. I'm kind of finding it difficult to play this game as much as I love it. It sounds kind of like contradictory, but it's the best way I can explain it. It's like having a love-hate relationship with something, because I love the way that this game plays and how it feels, but there's so much stacked against me as someone who wants to play the game that I feel like I can't play the game sometimes. Which kind of brings me to WISHLIST that I put together that I'm just going to kind of read off. The first thing that I wrote down was okay, so I think I touched upon this before when I mentioned that before they made all the big changes, Bungie and Sony seemed to be really reluctant on some of the things that they had in the game. And one of those was duos. And duos can be a very particular thing because, the game is designed for 3 people, but you can't always get 3 people. And if you're playing with random people, sometimes they don't want to use their mics, or they just don't want to talk to you, or they're doing their own thing. And then there's the other end of the spectrum where you're playing by yourself, and it kind of becomes a completely different game at that point, depending on how aggressive or non-aggressive you are playing the game. So their duos ideally should be that like fine middle ground for people who might have that one person who can tag along for a couple hours or something. But it seems like that they didn't consider it early enough, because as duos exist now, which actually it technically doesn't, because they were doing it on a prototype basis. That's all it was, is a prototype, and they were doing it for very specific maps at specific times, to where, you know, they have to like learn cues and balancing and stuff just for duos, and kind of like start from square one with it, when that should have just been something they did a long time ago. And it's just kind of weird that they didn't do that. And even though with most extraction shooters, Marathon is definitely the forefront for a narrative-driven extraction shooter, but I still think it's not enough. It's a little biased because I come from Halo and a little bit of Destiny, but Bungie's just really good at writing and world developing and stuff like that. And it's crazy to think that they, when returning to Marathon, that story wasn't the primary focus with the game. I sometimes have this biased feeling about how, and I've heard other people with this complaint before, about if they wanted to do an extraction shooter for whatever reason to chase trends that they have were, you know, because first they chased the looter shooter trend, and now they're chasing the extraction shooter trend, which I'm not totally on board with Bungie. But just looking back at their run of Halo, like, they're so good. Even the original Marathon games, and even some of their other games like Oni, that's a, you know, very specific throwback for some of you potentially watching this. But they're so good at campaigns and stories that I can't help but to think that maybe in another world, this is just like a single player game that, instead of being an Xbox exclusive, was a PlayStation exclusive, and they just returned to Marathon and did something new with Marathon. I don't know. So I did write down shell customization, which is also kind of a controversial point, because some people are like, don't change it, we like it the way that it is, which I do like it. And I do like their version of the hero-based shooter. I know they don't like calling it that, but it is. Sure, like, some people might classify it as classes, but you select a character or a shell with its own unique abilities, voice, and stuff like that. Which they do conceptualize, they put in context for it and why it all makes sense in the lore and stuff like that. But on paper, let's just be real, it's a hero shooter. But I can't help but to look back at like Halo Reach or even Destiny and know what kind of customization that they can do. And even looking at the Blue Fork runner, I don't know if that's the actual, for as much as I do know, even with some of the ARG stuff, I'm not entirely sure if the character from the original teaser is called the Blue Fork runner or just the Fork runner or something. I do know that that's what Jake the Alright and his community referred to it as, so that's kind of just what I go by. But I can't help but to look at that, which I actually really love the design of that character, and just in tandem with the graphic realism that Bungie's going for, on top of the customization that they've done before, and to think, how cool would it be to not only just customize, but even design a character from like head to toe? Maybe that's when you would select a class or something that, you know, you would main or something, and really just make the runner your own. I mean, I really do like it as it stands now. Could I do with more skins? Yes, but I don't give them too much flack for that, because we're still in season 1 and that's subject to change, and I can't really complain all that much, because I'm just glad that, you know, 99% of them are free, which is always a nice thing and very refreshing for a live service game. The next note that I have here is deep tutorials. Emphasis on deep, with lots of arrows, exclamation points, and so on and so forth. Because if there's one thing that Bungie has never been good at, it's tutorials. or onboarding in general. This game and Destiny had the same problem. They kind of assume you know how to play a first-person shooter game. They assume that you know what, in this case, an extraction shooter is. And they do give you a tutorial when you first boot up the game, but it's just not in-depth enough. I've gotten comfortable with the UI and the menu of the game. I think, 6 hours, whether that's one session or between a couple, I think 6 hours is all it takes to really get your head wrapped around the UI. I think it's more like kits, controls, how the world works, things that you can interact with, so on and so forth. Especially controls, because there's even like some looting things that feel really weird and unintuitive, just because of like very specific controls. I think all could just be resolved with, more in-depth tutorial or even a gun range. Sometimes you don't know how a gun works until you pick it up, which I think for a game as very specific and as unique as this game is, could do with a firing range. I know some of these things that I'm bringing up are things that Arc Raider does, now that I think of it, but they are their main competitor. So it might help to look at what Arc Raider is doing right. Personally, do I like Marathon more than Arc Raiders? Yes. I think Marathon in general is just a more fun game, but I can see why Arc Raiders would be more approachable for people new to the extraction shooter, or just in general, because of how much more intuitive some of its design and UI can be. And the last thing is just a campaign, kind of circling back to the story forward structure thing that I said. I just think that if there's anything that Bungie knows how to knock out of the park, and they haven't done since Halo, is just a campaign. Some people would say that Destiny did it. I would call Destiny just, some cutscenes here and there, but like you go to a planet, you scan something, you shoot some people, and you're done, which is a little bit of Marathon too, but the progression even feels better in Marathon, especially just knowing what kind of story Marathon comes from and what it still has to offer. I think doing a extraction shooter where the only narrative you get is audio logs and then looking at like still images of AIs talking to you, it leaves a little bit to be desired, I guess. But with that being said, I do have a pitch of what this potential campaign would be, so here it is. I do have a quick little disclaimer. Idea could technically work if they decided to do some sort of DLC or expansion, maybe for like $30 or something, for the game to accomplish this. And I do love the game as it is now, and I can't wait to see what Bungie cooks up for this game in the near future. But this idea, for the sake of the video, for fun, for the sake of just wanting to be creative, was written to work for the game if it was initially built around this, and what it would be if the game as it is now never came out or whatever. The disclaimer is essentially just to say this is very hypothetical. This is just for fun. If Bungie wants to take this, if they want to call me up, fine. But this is mainly for fun. But the game, it would be called Marathon Omega Point. Years after the attack on the Marathon and the colonists of Tau Ceti 4 have gone silent, it's finally time that we find out what happened. New Caloric and Cyber Acme have joined forces to utilize their resources and technologies to push this investigation with your help. You are a runner under the alias Blue. The mission is to send you onto Tau Ceti 4 in hopes to collect samples, retrieve lost records, and find a means to safely board the UESC Marathon. This would be the intro or prologue to the game, where you're on Tau Ceti planet side to help onboard players. Yes, I meant to emphasize it that way. Your home base would be your shuttle, the Pheidippides. Pheidippides? For you Greek nerds, you know what that is. This is where you'd return to, manage your vault, explore the codex, which I'll get to later. Instead of priority contracts like they exist in the game now, each level or story mission would act as your primary contract or mission you need to accomplish, and maybe have optional objectives that you could try to accomplish to level up faster. So essentially, explain this a little bit more. The gameplay loop would be you select your gear, just like any other extraction shooter. You infill on a selected map. Let's say in the beginning portion of the game, it would be Tau Ceti. You do your primary objectives, maybe your optional objectives, and when you successfully exfil is when the game progresses. You get a cutscene, you get character development, you are introduced to more of the world, and then you return to your shuttle, and then the loop starts back over. And then when you finally reach the marathon, it'd be up to you to infiltrate, loot what you can, discover what you can, and clear out any threats as you go. Your goal would be to find access to further sections of the ship so that each time you come back, you can explore the ship deeper. I guess the best way to explain this, if you're familiar with the new game Saros that's coming out for PlayStation, it is a roguelike, much like its predecessor Returnal, but the difference is that every time you end a run, instead of starting all the way back to the beginning biome, you kind of get checkpoints and you can pick up where you left off at like a previous biome or one of your choosing. And this game would be similar. Every time you successfully complete your contracts and exfil, you unlock that region that you just went through, and you can kind of pick up where you left off, but maintaining the extraction shooter concepts like loot and stuff. And if you fail, you have to start that over. Similar to the original trilogy, the game should be more like an immersive sim, making you feel more like the character thrusted into the situation. Bungie could look to survival horror games like Dead Space as well, in how finding loose audio logs or text throughout the ship can help the player understand what happened. You would still have the codex as it exists in the game now. The only difference is that instead of you having to exfil to hear whatever it is that you've collected, just like in Dead Space, if you pick up an audio log, you should have the option to listen to it right then and there as you're playing. And if you successfully exfil, the codex will save it for you so that you can always go back to it if you want to, but it wouldn't save it if you don't exfil, giving you incentive to go back, find it again, or even explore further if you wanted to know more about the lore. The game would slowly unravel the world to new players, explain Durandal's involvement, and reveal why this timeline in particular matters and was the narrative Durandal wanted to shape in his own image. This version of the runner you'd play would be mainly based on the Blue Fork runner, as I just brought up a little bit ago, from the original teaser. You'd be given the chance to customize the uniform, shape, language, and even some of the abilities of the shell, maybe even run into other runners based on ones that are in the actual version of the game as other characters. So for example, the runners that we know of, like the Destroyer, Thief, Assassin, and so on, instead of being optional player characters, they would actually be characters in the game that you would interact with, run into, or maybe even be rivaling runners working for the different factions. And this would be aside from other players that you'd still run into, you so chose to play online still, if they went the PvP route. Because something that I think I missed in my description of how this would work is primarily you'd be playing on your own and it would be PvE, but like Halo, having a team deathmatch option or multiplayer option, you'd still have the option to back away from the story and just select strictly extraction shooter like multiplayer, and it would take you into something that's more reminiscent of the version of the game that we have now, where you select a character, you select your loot, maybe even loot that you've collected from the main game, and you can bring it with you to fight other players. But the campaign would mainly be PvE, but you running into the other shells or the other characters such as Locust, Glitch, Void, Icon. This would be kind of parallel to the original security officer and the other 9 battleroids that stayed to fight planetside in the original trilogy. But that's pretty much it. I didn't want to write too much about specific story beats like I tend to do before. I kind of wanted to just give an idea of where my mind goes to of what I wish the original trilogy was. But let me know what you thought about it. Not so much if you prefer it over the game game as it exists now. It's more of just like a thumbs up or thumbs down kind of thing. I just like brainstorming stuff like that, especially when I have time to think about it as much as I do. I do want to preface that I really do love the version of the game as it is now. Regardless of some of my issues and some of my gripes with the game, I do like it, and I do want to see what Bungie does with it next, because we're so early into its lifespan. I also just can't help but to think of what could have been. And also just in general, I think after 12 years of Destiny, I think it's about time that Bungie does something different, more broaden their scope a little bit more. But that's it. I hope you enjoyed yourself today. I know this was kind of a long ramble session, but that's kind of what I intended this to be, and this was the best way for me to do this video without it feeling too like I was taking it too seriously, I guess. If you're still here, feel free to do all that algorithm stuff. Please, if you're wanting something else to watch, or if you want to see anything else that I've done, I would highly recommend to go watch the DC thing that I did. I just think it's a fun video, and it was a very specific journey that means a lot to me, and I wish I had more of a way to convey it in the video that I did. You guys missed it now, but there was actually a longer portion of the video that doesn't exist anymore. It was like a temporary thing that I had up. If I had to choose between the two, I don't know if I said this already, if I had to choose between the two, like to choose all, like have you do all your algorithm stuff, I'd say go do it with that video. Leave a like at that comment over there, share that video, because I'm trying to get James Gunn to see that video. Yeah, I don't, that's the best way I can put it. I do have some other channels if you're at all interested. I have a very, very new channel, like it's brand new. Every now and then when I'm playing video games, if I feel like, oh, this would be funny to record or something, sometimes I just press record and I decide to post it on, it's called Aaron's Playing something. I'll link it in the description, but it's not super consistent, and it's also very new. It's literally just for shits and giggles. It's nothing consistent or that I'm gonna keep up with too often. And then I also have the podcast, which Brandon and I are trying to be more consistent with. It's on a semi-regular basis, so we're only going to do videos or episodes when we feel like we have stuff to talk about, but we are going to try to have a longer running season than we did last year. And I've also talked about Marathon a few times over there, mainly in defense of the game. I'm about to get into my post-show discussion really quick, but if you decided you got what you came for, I appreciate you being here. To all of my two-legged, four-legged, and even six-legged friends, yeah, I know you're out there. I hope you had a great night, day, week, whenever you were watching this, and hopefully I'll see you guys soon.
I'm Gus Moraine of New Caloric, speaking to you from the distant past, I suppose. This message was recorded for the colonists on board the UESC Marathon. If you're hearing, you are a founding member of humanity's first exoplanet colony. Congratulations. Humanity thanks you for your sacrifice. Yes, I said sacrifice. No, media optimization didn't like it.
All right. If you're still here, I'm going to do a little post-show discussion. This is mainly a follow-up to my last video. Again, I can't preface it enough. If you missed it, if you have watched it, if you didn't do the algorithm stuff, please I would much rather you guys give that video all of the attention in the world. Because efforts have been stale, unfortunately, if you know what I'm referring to. No answers from calls or emails, and options are becoming very limited as time goes on. I'm not looking for that video to go viral. I know James Gunn's very social or very active on social media, and if there was any way that like my Instagram shorts or whatever just get him to watch that DC video, that's the goal. Because I don't have an agent, and it's hard to reach people like him in studios like that. So luckily the internet is in a stage where there's a chance that he could see it. So with that being said, this will probably be my last long form video that I know of for a while. I am really interested in the game Pragmata, so maybe after I've played that for a little bit, I might do another ramble video. But if anything, you'll mainly just see me on the small little gaming channel or over on the podcast. Again, unless I decide to do something that is easy, or maybe I'll do update videos on my new script, which, by the way, I know in my last video I said that I was all prepared and I knew what I wanted to do. I do know what I want to do, but it wasn't as strong of an idea as I thought it was. So I kind of had to rework a lot of stuff, and I'm going a little bit slower than I wanted to, but I want to make sure it's right. It's just artist integrity, I guess. But I may or may not try to do some vague update videos and kind of maybe even vlogs here and there as I write it, because I still work a 9 to 5, so I have to be very sparing with my time, and I don't want to put any brain power into YouTube when I can be putting that energy into the script. But but this still matters to me, so I'd like you guys to be along for the ride if I can manage to do that. So I might do some other ramble videos in the future, or just updates. But if you've made it, I wrote this little note that says, if you made it this far, comment post show. I guess you could do that, or again, just go watch the other video. But regardless, if you are watching, I would be shocked, honestly, but thanks. I appreciate it. But that'll be all for me, you guys. So I'll see you later. Damn, I did that in one take.